What was meant to be a night of fun and bonding among friends quickly spiraled into a night of terror they would never forget. They laughed, they joked, and they felt invincible, unaware of the lurking danger that was slowly creeping closer. But something else was out there, something watching their every move, waiting for the right moment to strike. Sarah was the first to notice something was off. A tree with ancient markings, symbols she couldn't decipher, but they sent chills down her spine. She told herself it was nothing, just an old tree with old marks, but deep down, she knew something wasn't right. As the fire danced and cast wild shadows, the feeling of dread hung heavy in the air, suffocating the laughter that had once filled the night. It started with a howl, far off in the distance, but close enough to send a ripple of fear through the group. David, always the brave one, tried to reassure everyone it's probably just a coyote, he said. But his words did little to calm their nerves. But when his light caught something, just a flash of movement, he wasn't so sure anymore. The temperature plummeted, and the once vibrant forest was now dead silent, no birds, no insects, just the crackle of the fire and their own quickening breaths. It felt as though the woods were closing in on them, the trees forming a cage from which there was no escape. They decided someone should keep watch, but they didn't realize that, in these woods, watching wasn't enough. Sarah's heart skipped a beat when she saw it, a figure, human-like, standing still as a statue among the trees, watching them. When she woke David, the figure had vanished, as if it had never been there, leaving her to wonder if her mind was playing tricks on her. But the unease didn't leave her. It clung to her, like a shadow she couldn't shake. Morning came, but with it, a terrifying discovery: Emma was gone. No trace, no struggle, just an empty sleeping bag where she had been. They searched, they screamed her name until their throats were raw, but all that answered was the echo of their own voices. With every step deeper into the woods, their hope of finding her dwindled, replaced by a growing sense of dread. In a small clearing, they found her belongings, her shoes neatly placed as if she had taken them off herself, but there was no sign of Emma. Then they saw it, a dark stain, blood, seeping into the earth, partially hidden by the leaves. This was no accident. They stood frozen, the horror of the situation sinking in. They were not alone in these woods, and whatever had taken Emma was still out there. They packed up in a hurry, fear driving them to move faster, but the feeling of being watched only grew stronger, suffocating them. Footsteps matching their pace, following them, taunting them. But every time they looked back, there was nothing there. They ran, driven by pure terror, but no matter how fast they went, the footsteps were always right behind them. They burst out of the forest, collapsing in the light of dawn, their bodies trembling, their minds shattered by what they had endured. The woods behind them were silent once more, peaceful as if nothing had happened, but they knew the truth: it was still out there. Sarah's eyes, now haunted by the horrors of the night, told the story of a fear that would never fade, a memory that would forever be etched in her soul. Weeks passed, but the nightmares didn't. Every night, Sarah found herself back in the woods, reliving the terror that still clung to her like a second skin. The photo, once a symbol of friendship and joy, was now a painful reminder of the night that tore their lives apart. As the frame shattered, so did any remaining hope that things would ever return to normal. Some scars, after all, never truly heal. In the dim light of David's living room, they tried to piece together the nightmare, but the more they talked, the less sense it made. The newspapers called it a mystery, but for David and Sarah, it was a nightmare, one that left them with more questions than answers. They had survived, but survival had come at a cost, one that left them with scars that would never fade and questions that would never be answered. Despite the fear, something drew Sarah back to the woods, an unexplainable pull, as if the forest still held something she needed to confront. The clearing was different now, overgrown and quiet, but something caught her eye, new markings on a different tree, fresh and sinister. The markings were almost identical, but this time, there was something more, a symbol of a figure standing among the trees, watching. It was then Sarah knew the horror wasn't over. As she drove away, she couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror, and there it was, a figure, standing at the edge of the woods, watching her with cold, unblinking eyes. It didn't move, didn't follow, just stood there, watching, until it slowly faded back into the forest, leaving behind only silence and dread. The forest returned to its peaceful facade, but Sarah knew the truth. Beneath the golden light and the rustling leaves, the terror still lurked, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul. Years had passed, but the memories had not faded. The article was old, yellowed with time, but the fear in Sarah's eyes was as fresh as that night. The world had moved on, but for Sarah and David, the nightmare was far from over. The woods still called to them, even in the safety of daylight. For a moment, Sarah saw it again, a shadowy figure, just outside the cafe, watching her. And then, just as quickly, it was gone. But she knew, deep down, that it would always be with her. Back home, the feeling returned, that same, suffocating sensation that someone was behind her, watching her every step. She locked the door, but the unease didn't leave her. It was as if the walls themselves were watching, waiting for the right moment to close in. The street was empty, but that didn't comfort her. The night in the woods had left a mark, a lingering fear that would never truly fade. The sound of creaking floorboards jolted her awake. She listened, her heart pounding, knowing that whatever was out there had finally come for her. Every step felt like an eternity, the darkness around her pressing in as she followed the sound, her mind racing with memories of that night. There it was, standing in the corner, just as it had in the woods. Its eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness, sent a shiver down her spine. This time, there would be no escape. As it stepped into the light, Sarah saw the truth. This was no human, but a twisted, nightmarish being, its features contorted in a grotesque parody of life. She couldn't move, couldn't scream. The terror was too great, and the figure too real, too close. Just as its hand brushed her skin, the world plunged into darkness. Silence. Stillness. And then, nothing. Morning came, flooding the room with light, and there she was, unconscious, but alive. The figure was gone, leaving behind only the cold, hollow feeling of its presence. In her hand was something new, a pendant, old and weathered, with symbols etched into its surface. She had never seen it before, yet it felt strangely familiar, as if it had been waiting for her. As she awoke, fear gripped her heart once again. The pendant's touch was cold, and its presence unnerving. What had happened the night before? And what did it mean? Desperate for answers, Sarah turned to the only person who might help, a historian who knew the town's dark secrets. She placed the pendant in his hands, hoping he would unravel its mystery. The historian's face darkened as he examined the symbols, recognition dawning in his eyes. He had seen this before, in the town's oldest and most forbidden texts. With trembling hands, he opened a book old and filled with dust. The illustrations within mirrored Sarah's experience, shadowy figures and cursed objects that brought nightmares to life.
The truth was more terrifying than Sarah had imagined. The pendant was the key to an ancient curse, one that bound restless spirits to the woods, spirits that were now awake and seeking vengeance. Horror washed over her as the realization hit. By stepping into the woods, they had awakened the curse, unleashing spirits that had been trapped for centuries. The historian's warning was clear: the spirits would not rest until they had what they sought. The only way to end this was to return the pendant, deep into the forest where it belonged. But would she dare to go back?